Hello and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I want to talk about the most basic plot elements, like the easiest ones. Since this is our first video on plot elements, I want it to mostly be a review, but if you haven't heard of some of these terms, this will be also pretty good because I'll go into some detail. It's a little windy out today. I think that'll be fine. I have a pretty good mic on my camera. Yeah, so this is the microphone on my camera, and this part actually keeps the wind out. It's called a dead cat. So even though there's a little bit of wind behind me, I think it'll be all right. So as I was saying, this is going to be a review of some of the most basic plot elements. The first thing I'd like to talk about is protagonist. And we've discussed it a little bit in class, but think about the main character. Oftentimes it's the person you're rooting for, like you hope will make it through their day. They are going to have some struggle that I want to talk about in a minute. It's called conflict, and that is often with the antagonist, but the protagonist is your main character. Think about something like Stranger Things. Is there really a main character for that? Not every book or movie has a single main character. Sometimes we call that an ensemble. Depending on what episode you're watching, maybe Eleven is the protagonist, or maybe Dustin is the protagonist for that episode. Most books or novels will have a single protagonist. A lot of television shows will have multiple protagonists. In Max Swings for the Fences, guess who the protagonist is? Well, it's the person who has their name in the title. So Max is our protagonist for Max Swings for the Fences, and we are going to follow him. It's through his point of view that we see things. We'll talk about point of view in another video, but he is our main character. He's our protagonist. He's kind of our good guy. Good person, good element. Protagonists do not always have to be people, and they don't actually always have to be good, but we'll talk about that in another video too. And when I talk about plot elements, those are little bits that make up the plot. And the plot is simply the things that happen in your story or your movie or your TV show. For instance, if somebody had never seen Stranger Things before, maybe you haven't, you could say that the plot of Stranger Things is basically a boy messes around with some supernatural stuff, gets thrown into this other world. He eventually gets out of that world and things go back to normal, mostly. Well, there is a season 2 and a season 3, but the conflict, which I'll talk about in a minute, basically ends at the end of season 1. That's the plot. My wife needs some help with something, so I have to finish making this video later. The next time you see me, maybe I'll be wearing something different. Maybe I'll be inside. That's my shed, in case anybody wonders. The door's broken. Yeah, right up there. I broke the door this summer. But like I said, I need to go. My wife needs my help. I don't want to get in trouble. See you later. My wife really can't get me in trouble. I'm an adult, but I don't want to make her mad. All right, like I said, I'll be right back. Look at this grasshopper on my car. Apparently she didn't need me. She said I can finish filming. So back to protagonist, plot, and antagonist. We haven't talked about antagonist yet. Every good story needs an antagonist. The way I think of antagonist is bad guy. Now, just like protagonist, it doesn't have to be a guy. It doesn't even have to be a person, but that is whatever element or person that gets in the way of your protagonist. So every protagonist in every good story wants something. At the beginning of Max Swings for the Fences, our protagonist Max simply wants to fit in. But eventually there will be some antagonist that opposes opposes them and makes it hard to get what they wanted. There are 5 or 6 different types of conflict. We will not talk about that today, but once you know what the protagonist is, and once you know what the antagonist is, there is where you have your conflict. So it could be something as simple as person versus person. I'll talk about things like that, person versus nature, person versus supernatural. I'll do that in another video. Maybe you have heard of some of those things, but that is conflict when you have one force, often good, against another force, often bad. But one thing you will learn about English when we talk about writing and plot and things like that, I can never say this always happens. Rules are always broken. Writing is an art form, and oftentimes when you want to create something new, something different, you break the rules. And that's okay when we talk about writing or music or any art form. There are certain rules when it comes to plot, and often those are broken. I'll let you know though, that most of the rules are not broken in Max Swings for the Fences. It's a pretty straightforward story. So we've talked about protagonist, we've talked about antagonist, we've briefly talked about conflict. We'll talk about that later in more detail in another video. But the last thing I want to talk about is setting. And when we talk about setting, most people know that that has something to do with where the story takes place. But a lot of people forget that it also has to do with when the story takes place. So setting is both where and when the story takes place. When we're talking about Max Swings for the Fences, the when is present day. That's a great term to know, present day. That means it could happen in 2020. It could probably happen in 2025. It could probably even happen in 2010. We don't know exactly when it takes place. We can look to see when it was published, but that doesn't always tell us when it took place. You can think if they have computers, if they have cars, if they have cell phones, it's probably present day. If they have flying cars, well, that's probably the future. If they get around in horses and buggies, that's probably the past. So setting, time, place, when and where the story takes place, and that can often have a dramatic effect on the plot. If you're reading a story that takes place before cell phones were invented, that could be a very different story than if you're reading about a time where there are flying cars. All right, that's it for this video that I filmed in my backyard on a rather windy day. If you have any questions about those plot elements, protagonist, antagonist, conflict, or setting, let me know. Get with me in the chat, get with me Google Meet, get with me in Zoom, get with me, maybe email. Thanks for watching. See you next time.